day to you, and welcome to the Real Estate Program, proudly brought to you by Rawson Properties Zimbabwe. I'm Unique Zimuto, your host, and of course for the past few weeks we've been having different discussions around property, why it's important that we value our property within the family setup and the corporate setup, and the future of property. Well, today we want to talk about something that a lot of you have obviously been eagerly waiting for. We want to talk about the laws around property. Why is it important that as a buyer you understand the laws before you purchase anything? You speak to your agent, you speak to your lawyer, because what we've obviously realized is it's easy to fall in love with a home and forget all the important legal questions you actually need to ask. And it's important to have these questions with your agent, with your lawyer, before moving forward with your purchase. And you know what this does? This actually will save you a lot of money and many headaches in the future. And to join me for this conversation, I have with me Agreement Rusena, who's the head of sales at Rawson Properties Zimbabwe, who's going to take us a little bit through, the do's and don'ts, especially when you're a buyer, and why we have so many Zimbabweans and so many people all over the world that are still being scammed when it comes to buying property. How are you today, Agreement?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Okay, thank you for having me.
So just before, we were speaking about your role as head of sales, which is obviously a very big portfolio agreement. Let's talk a little bit about what a sales agent's role is, especially when it comes to a buyer coming to you and saying, I've seen a property I like and I want to buy it.
Okay, thank you for the question. Firstly, the role of our agent is to wake up every day and look for properties to sell. That's the primary role of our agent.
Right.
Then once we get a property to sell, the next thing will be to get the necessary documentation that comes with this the particular property.
Right.
Then once we are certain that we have enough in terms of the documentation, we proceed and sell the property into marketing, putting the property on all the advertising platforms,
right.
Then try to get that one buyer for the property. Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting. I mean, obviously the first step is to find the property and find the right documentation.
Yes.
What sort of documentation are we looking at here?
Okay. There are quite a couple of areas in which a property can be owned.
Right.
Number one, there is a deed of transfer. This is the most common and secure form of owning a property.
Right.
And that's the most preferred for every homeowner.
Right.
Then another thing is a cession.
Right.
Where a property can be owned through a developer or a local authority like City of Harare or any other authority. Then so these are the most primary forms of ownership of a property: a deed of transfer and cession. Yes.
Cession. Deed of transfer and cession. Then linking it to the buyer, who usually gets duped or scammed. Do they not know that these documents are the primary documents that are needed when it comes to purchasing property?
Okay. We have primarily two sets of buyers.
Right.
Number one, there is a first-time buyer. Then there are those property investors. Some may know, especially the investors, and some may not know.
Right.
Especially the first-time buyers. So there could be lack of information with regards to those kind of ownerships from especially the first-time buyers.
Right.
Yeah. So those are the areas that we then help educating them in terms of the forms of ownership of these particular properties.
Right.
Yeah.
So even though I'm a first-time buyer, what are some of the biggest reasons, Agreement, that a lot of these buyers are getting into property fraud? Is it because they don't have the information? Because you can easily look up certain things or speak to an expert around these issues. Why do you think we have so many Zimbabweans falling prey to this fraud?
Yeah. Number one is the choice of the agency that they deal with.
Right.
We have more than 200 registered estate agents.
Okay.
And for some reason, there are buyers who then are not keen to try and find out whether the agency is registered or not, because we've got a regulatory body in the form of the Estate Agents Council,
Right.
which registers all the estate agents who are supposed to be operating. So the buyers may not have information to that effect to say, look, who is registered, who is not.
Right.
So once someone then deals with a non-registered estate agent, then that's where the problem starts.
I see.
Yes, so there is reason for every buyer to try and look for that information in terms of who is registered, who is not, to start with.
And how do I get that information if I am to then try to find out a little bit more about the institutional company that's about to help me purchase a land or a property? Where do I go if I want to know if they're registered or not?
Okay. Look, they've got a name, of course. Then you, the buyer, would then need to find out from the Estate Agents Council,
Right.
who are located at Newlands Shopping Center. So that's where there is a register of who is registered and who is not registered.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's number one. Number two, even those who are registered, there is also need for a buyer to look at the track record of the institution that they are dealing with. Look, they are established firms who have their clients at heart,
Yeah.
who then looks at their clients and say, look, over and above getting money, we also want to make sure we service our clients and service them well.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it's quite interesting. You were talking about, as head of sales, you know, one of your key roles is to make sure that you satisfy the client,
Yes.
you know, to the fullest extent.
Exactly.
When we look at some key steps to avoid real estate fraud, what are some of these key steps one should take?
Okay. As Rawson Properties, my role at Rawson Properties is to make sure we try and minimize these frauds
Right.
as much as we can. So my role at Rawson is to make sure every property that we sell satisfies minimum expectations of our system. As an example, if an agent brings a property for sale, my role is to make sure it ticks all the boxes in terms
Right.
of the paperwork that we expect. For example, if a property has got title, we make sure whoever says is a seller, we get their proof of identification. That's number one. That's the first document that we ask from them. Number two, we ask for a copy of their deed of transfer.
Right.
Then once we get those two documents, then we also expect him or ask him to fill in an instruction to sell. So these are the three key documents. Number one, proof of ownership of the property in the form of a title deed. Number two, a mandate or an instruction to sell. Then number three, we make sure we also make sure we go to the title deeds office to check whether the person who claims to own the property is the rightful owner,
Right.
or whether the property has got issues there. Because there are issues to do with caveat, where there could be a court case against the subject property,
Yeah.
or there is a mortgage bond registered against the property. So those are the areas that we look for. So as long as that the property satisfies those conditions, then we
Yeah.
can say, look, let's proceed and advertise the property.
That's fantastic agreement. Lastly, let's look at some do's and don'ts, especially for advice to buyers when purchasing property.
Okay. Yeah, number one, I still make an emphasis on the institution that one is dealing with.
Right.
There has to be a track record in terms of their performance. So it's very key. So to avoid being duped, it's very important that number one, the company is registered. Number two, they have a very sound track record in terms of delivering. So these are the two key things that a buyer should look out for.
Right.
Then the buyer should also make sure he listens to the agent. That's number one. Number two, there is also need for a buyer to engage a lawyer,
right,
a legal practitioner, to check the authenticity of the documents for the property. In as much as we do that as an agency, there is also need to go a step further and say, look, I should appoint a lawyer who should then check the authenticity of my documents, so that one is satisfied that everything is above board.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. That was Agreement Rusena, who is the head of sales at Rawson Properties Zimbabwe. And at the end of the day, he's saying that when you're the buyer, it's not only just about trusting the agent, but you should also take key steps, especially in getting yourself a lawyer to take you through some of this paperwork. And talking about lawyers, after the short break, we'll have an expert in the law field to tell us a little bit about the laws around real estate. We'll be right back. The first step to acquiring a property is to want to have one and gathering the financial resources towards the cost of acquisition, commonly the purchase price. So whenever you intend to buy a property, it's important, after identifying the property, to investigate on the genuineness of the property that has been offered for sale. This process is called a due diligence exercise. In carrying out a due diligence exercise when purchasing a property, normally the objective is to verify that the property being sold in reality exists. There are so many instances where people were sold non-existent properties. In order to do this, be sure of the description of the property that is being sold and the current owner of the property. Establish the legal status of the property that is being sold. It's important to know if the piece of land sold has an owner. If so, who is the person owning the land in question or the house in question. And once you know the owner of the land in question or house in question, it is then easy to probe further questions on seller in order to assess the sellability of the property. As sometimes in instances where some people were sold land that cannot be sold as it was state land, others were sold houses that belonged to deceased estates without authority from the executor or the family, or worse still, as is most common these days, vacant land belonging to an unfamiliar person is just being sold because it has been lying there undeveloped for some time. So to understand better, it is only the owner of the property who has the power to sell it. So if any person purports to sell any property that does not belong to them, they must have legal authority from the owner to sell the property, either in form of a mandate, in case of an estate agent or attorney, or a power of attorney. It's a good idea to always know who the owner of the property is, and if by all means possible, make personal contact with the owner as part of the verification due diligence process. Where an estate agent is involved, you can still do a verification on the owner. There are instances where you may deal with a bogus agent or a legal practitioner. You'll notice on so many occasions that the estate agent would require you to do your own verification so that you do not hold them liable in the event that the property is not genuine. Another purpose of due diligence is to get validation from relevant bodies that the land in question or house in question has no issues. At this stage, besides validating that the land belongs to a certain individual, you are now checking on rates, arrear status, penalties, if any, status of council lease on that land, whether or not there are any pending payments, and all of those issues need to be addressed. It is critical, however, to know these because there are a number of motivations for people to sell some of their assets, including running away from issues connected to the property. So you must do due diligence. So it's just not about understanding who the owner of the property is, but also have a background of why this is being sold, the background of the land or the house, because they might be running away from debt issues that might catch up with you along the way. Lastly, who can own property in Zimbabwe? Everyone has the right in any part of Zimbabwe to acquire, hold, and dispose of all forms of property, either individually or in an association with others, irrespective of their sex, gender, or marital status. Can women own property? Yes, of course. Women can own property in their own right, including men. How difficult is it to own property? It's not difficult to own property, be it movable or immovable, as long as the legal requirements for transfer of ownership to the new owner have been met. Can you get a loan? We've had conversations about this before. In order to obtain a loan from a bank, you'll need to fulfill certain requirements depending with the institution, which include, among things, providing a statement of your liabilities and assets and details of security collateral that you will provide.
Good day. My name is Nespet Chinamo from Roson Properties. I am the project sales manager. I'm going to talk about real estate investment as a way to hedge against inflation. When we talk about investments, there are several factors that hinder or that contribute or that investors look at when they want to consider investment choice. When we look at the several investment opportunities, I would suggest that an investor would consider real estate as the most appropriate investment that will give a good return and also has less risk in terms of the return and management. When we talk about inflation, we're saying it is a general increase in prices of goods and services. And inflation erodes the value of investment, which is less associated with real estate. When we consider other types of investment, when inflation goes up, it erodes even up to the capital that has been injected into the investment. So when you consider real estate, even if a property goes bent down, there are residues which comes into place. Residues can also help in mitigating the risk associated with real estate. Real estate also has got a passive source of income, which comes with less operation cost and also less risk. One with passive income can generate interest or rent from letting of the space, where somebody has less management and less risk. Risk and inflation are two most important things to consider when coming up with an investment choice. In most cases, like we look at environment in Zimbabwe, inflation is high, so we always advise investors to look onto investment towards real estate. Real estate comes into place when you buy your land or your building, you look forward to appreciation in value. You look forward to consistency in receiving of your rentals. So unlike other types of investment where you get a lot of depreciation, where you get a lot of turbulent in terms of interest rates, so I recommend that one goes for real estate investment as a way to hedge against inflation.